Hey folks, David Stewart here. For real, here it is. Much to my wife's chagrin. I've teased about it on the channel. I've tortured people on Twitter. The idea that I might actually read Twilight. And yes, I'm going to read it. I'm going to do some content on it, some analysis. Why am I doing this? A little bit of background. This is not a book I like. Years ago when this came out, I read like the first 50 pages and I thought it was like one of the worst things I've read, is what I'd said. In truth, I've read worse things by far since then. But that's not a great attitude if you're looking to improve your craft, because if something is a sensation, if something's a big hit, something has that massive popularity, that social proof, then there's probably something in it which allowed for that explosion to happen. Now, there might be an element of randomness to like a positive black swan like Twilight, but that doesn't mean it's all dumb luck. There's things in here that which allowed it to be the sensation that it was, and so it's important if you're an author to be able to look at a book and see what it does right, even if it's a book that's not meant for you. Clearly not my demographic. This is really like 11 to 18-year-old girls is probably what I would guess it to be. Of course, it's been popular far outside that demographic. Not big bearded dudes in their 30s, right? So even though it's not my demographic, even though it's not my style of writing, it's written in first person, which is something I don't really care for. You have to look at what's there and see how that facilitates its popularity and how readers were able to access it and enjoy the book as it is. So in this video, I'm really just going to look at the first part of the book, the first chapter, because that's what I read the other day. And so I thought I'd read it talk about it a little bit, and that's what this video is going to be. So this book actually, even though I only read the first 50 pages like many years ago and thought it was bad, the beginning of the book is very effective for being able to get people interested in reading the whole book and getting them pulled into other elements that could be presented by an author. So it's important to take note of how this is done. This is done through a couple of gimmicks, and the readership for this book may not have realized that they were gimmicks when they were reading it, especially at the time, because they may not have seen it before or may not have just realized that some of these things were cliches. So the book actually opens with, quote, a preface. Now, it actually opens with like a Bible verse, and then you have to figure out the context. It's kind of related to the cover, like you see an apple, and then there's a thing about not eating the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. Now, it's not actually a preface. It says preface. You can't see it because of how bright my studio lights are, but it's actually not a preface. It's really just a little prologue teaser thing. Preface would be if an author were actually talking as herself. But what it is, it's like, I'd never given much thought to how I would die. And then she explains that there's a hunter coming to kill her. The hunter smiled in a friendly way as he sauntered forward to kill me. It's like, oh, I wonder how she's going to get killed. Now, this actually does two things. First of all, it is an attention grabber. There's danger coming. This is an old technique. We've seen it in movies, novels, comics. It's where you show an event from the end of the movie, or usually about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the movie. The like second big plot point, a really big, important, dangerous thing that's happening to the character, and you show them in that state. Then you backfill to where they get there, and that keeps the reader or the viewer interested in all the things that you're going to do between a beginning, which may be a little bit slower in starting, and that high point. So it allows you to have an attention grabber and then have a beginning which is a little bit more slow to start. It's a technique that you can use, or you can choose not to use, or you could use some variation of it rather than showing something that's 3/4 of the way through. You could show something that happens at that moment, but we don't understand the context of it until later in there, and we have to learn the context of that important act, like somebody getting killed. So in this case, like, we want to get the danger, and then that also explains the first-person perspective, right? So we're like, oh, well, maybe this first-person perspective, maybe she could die. That's one of the problems with the first-person perspective, is that you have a reasonable assurity that the narrator herself will not die. And so that makes it a little bit less dangerous. So for a lot of stories where you want the series of characters, the main character, to have a lot of danger, first person's not always the best choice. You could also have first person from like a non-main character, like a witness, witness to the Messiah or something like that. Okay. Then after that, you get the first chapter, which is a slow starter, and but it does a lot of things really well that authors should take note of. It introduces the two primary drivers of of the plot, which is going to be Isabella Swan, Bella Swan, and Edward Cullen, a vampire, right? And it introduces them in a way where they already have like a certain amount of personal tension and it's not explained. So you start with the tension and then you backfill that, right? So you, as an author, it's just like this, where you start with the action and you backfill it. In some cases, it's very effective to start with the conflict and then explain it, contextualize it as you go. And that's kind of what happens. So it starts off with like, my mother drove me to the airport with the windows rolled down. That's a pretty boring opening line to a book when you stop and think about it. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix, the sky perfect, cloudless blue. It's like, this is not the best opening to a book, but we have that attention grabber, which makes it not as important. What you get there is a contrast between the desert and where she's going. She says, I'm going into exile by Olympia, Washington, from Phoenix. But of course, in this chapter, there's all these like conflicts of it. It's like she's going to exile, but why? Like, why is she leaving her mother? And I guess she mentions that there's like going to be a mother's boyfriend. She doesn't mention why she's moving to her father's house in Washington. Like, there's no explanation of why that happens. It's just something that is happening. And then there's like a mood contrast: bright, sunny Phoenix, dark, cloudy, gloomy Olympia. That is something that can be very effective, is somebody going from a very, an environment where they feel very bright to an environment where they feel very dark. Another thing about introducing the character, the main character, Bella Swan, in this first chapter, they show a couple of traits about her. The first one is that she's a bit precocious in the sense that she's actually more advanced than her age would probably indicate. This is important because one of the most, I think, important aspects of a main character in like a young adult novel or a novel targeted towards younger readers or teens in particular, is that it can act as a vehicle for reader fantasy. And that means the reader can not only identify with the character and want the character to succeed, but imagine that they themselves are the character. So the character has to have some traits that are in common with them. So one of the things that they do is they make the character a little bit precocious, meaning more advanced, more independent than a typical teenager might be, because the readers want to be more precocious. They want to be more advanced. They want to be more independent. They want to have more autonomy, more confidence. So the character has a couple of traits that the readership would want to desire, and then has a couple of things that are insecurities with the character as well, that allows the reader to have empathy or a little bit of an attachment to them because of familiar feelings. And so the thing that the insecurity that Stephanie Meyer chose in this first chapter is Isabella's pale skin. And of course, I'm guessing that'll have some sort of relevance to the vampires. Like, she looks kind of like a vampire. She has this pale skin. Now, the lightness or darkness of your skin itself is not like a beauty thing, right? Like, you could have dark skin and be beautiful, and you have light skin and be beautiful. But it is something that teenagers can think about when they're trying to, think about their flaws. My skin is too pale, whereas everybody else is beautiful and tan. It's like, well, you're not any less beautiful if you're pale. Or some people could think my skin is too dark. I wish I had lighter skin or something like that. I wish I looked like her. So a lot of it has to do with that social feeling of my traits are not what I would consider ideal in the social environment, and that she doesn't have like blonde or she doesn't have blonde hair or blue eyes. She has like dark hair and dark eyes, and these are the traits that the vampires also have. She mentions that her mother is like a half albino, and yes, you can pass on albino traits. That's a real thing. I had a friend in high school who was half black and had blonde hair and blue eyes because his mother was an albino African. How about that? A very interesting thing that she didn't pass on the traits for the pigment of her skin. So that's one of the things that a reader might feel some kind of sympathy to, because that's a common experience. So you have an advanced character that's advanced in some ways. She has like, I'm going to buy my own car. How she buys the car? Does she have a job? Like, most teenage girls don't have money to just buy a car. Her father buys her a car, and then there's some funny, awkward things when her father buys her car, which is that he's like, I bought a car from this guy. You remember going fishing with him? No, I don't. When did he buy it? Or he got it in 1978. Well, how old is it? It's late 50s, early 60s. Now, I point this out as an awkward thing because editors, clearly this wasn't edited by anybody who knows anything about cars or has like registered their own car even perhaps. If Stephen King had written that, he would have told you the exact year and the make and model of the car. Stephen King, was a 58 Dodge pickup with a step cab. You know, he would have mentioned everything. The silvered headlights, and because she likes this truck and it feels like home and it has some sort of scent that she likes within it. But there's no make or model of the truck. We don't know anything about it other than it's a truck. And I can't help but feel that that's a somewhat like, and somewhat of a female lens, in that it's a car, it's a truck, it's a form, it's a thing. And her fear of it being old is that it has some sort of social thing, right? My car's too old, people won't like me. And that's not a big problem. Like, most people aren't going to look at that and be like, well, that's a terrible bit of writing. Why didn't the editor catch that? Like, if I had been editing it, I would have been like, you just say it's a 58, call it a 58 Dodge step cab pickup or something, right? Just don't just say it's late 50s, early 60s. If you registered the car, it would have the manufacturer's date on it, right? You can't get the title with it. The title doesn't say late 50s, maybe early 60s on the title, right? It tells you that. So it was one of those things that popped out. It's like, that's not a thing. That's not a conversation any normal person would have. But because of the audience, they're probably not going to notice that detail. And that's really one of the reasons I bring it up. Besides the fact that I'm like, this is bad, it's that a 13-year-old girl reading this is not going to think about like what Stephen King would write about with a truck. She's not going to think about that at all. So it's not really a negative, even though I'm bringing it up as a negative because of the demographic, because of the targeting. It's not really a negative. Next thing is you introduce the other character, Edward Cullen, and the way that you introduce him is a way that introduces the conflict before you get any kind of background for why that conflict exists. She ends up sitting next to him in a chemistry class, and he's just like gives her the cold shoulder and is really upset. And then she catches him in the office wanting to switch his classes, and she doesn't understand why. She doesn't know why, and so that gives you a reason to keep reading. I wonder why they don't like you. Why doesn't he like her when she was so attracted to him? She saw him in like the cafeteria and was like, boy, he's beautiful. And that's another thing. It's like, if you're writing for teenage girls, they've probably looked across the cafeteria at a boy and been like, wow, that guy looks good, right? And boys have done the same thing. They've seen some like girl like walk over with her trait, like, man, she's hot, right? Everyone's probably had some kind of moment like that if you went to public school. So it is a moment, it is an ability to increase your empathy with the character. Anyway, that's the first chapter. So you get an introduction of basic character traits. She's very independent. Her parents kind of let her do what she wants. She drives herself to school. She has her own car. Like you introduce all these things that give her the independence to execute the rest of the story. And also to act in a way that the audience wants. The audience wants to be independent themselves if they're not. It's kind of like some of these tricks I talked about with like Roald Dahl, where you have the kids are essentially suffering in abusive homes, not because everybody's in an abusive home, but everybody feels like they've been imprisoned or neglected or not understood by the parents at some point. And so it's a point for you to attach yourself to that person and put yourself in their place and be familiar with them and be sympathetic towards them and to root for that character. And so some of those things are in this one. The bad parts of that, like, we just don't really know why she goes there. There's no explanation. And we don't really know why a lot of the things are happening at the beginning of this book. Maybe they'll get filled in later as we go, and we'll cover in some later content. But that's the beginning of this one. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you've read Twilight, don't give me any spoilers. I've actually never seen the movies, and I read the story of how I read the beginning of this book. I slept on the couch of an old friend's girlfriend at the time when I was like visiting, when I was going through the town he lived in. And this was on the coffee table, and I woke up before everyone else because I just don't sleep as much as normal people. So I woke up early in the morning while everybody else was sleeping, and I just started reading the book, and I'm like, this is really bad. But I've decided to change my approach and my mindset so that I can better understand the book. That's the background that I want to get to with this. And I think I'll have a good time, even though I may not think it's a very It's not a book for David Stewart. We'll just put it that way. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. New book, Crown of Sight. It's out now. It's a little 2-hour read, so you can read it in 2 hours, same time it would take to watch a movie. It's great. It's got elves and a very interesting race of gigantic kind of people. I hope you'll like it, and I hope you will give me a review on Amazon and let me know what you think about it, and let other people know what you think about it. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.